I'm going live because what the heck? It's 2 days before my in person workshop in Toronto, and I am so freaking excited because, as you might all know, I have been running my practice 100% remote, and I am so excited to see a lot of my clients in person on Tuesday. So, 2 years ago, I was having a conversation with my mom while I was walking my dog. And I said to her, you know what? I am so burnt out from being 100% remote and I feel so isolated. So, she said to me, why don't you just host an in person workshop? And I thought, yeah, sure. That's simple. Trying to pull an event together, finding a venue, taking care of all of the logistics. Of course, my Middle Eastern entrepreneurial mom is so good at selling. She can walk into any venue and somehow convince them that it is a good idea for them to sponsor her events. Anyway, a month later, I actually got diagnosed with vestibular migraines. That was around 2025. It was actually in June when this happened to me. And it was very tough because I felt that I couldn't run my business by staying invisible. Getting on camera was giving me headaches. It caused me to feel dizzy. And there were times when the migraine attack was so terrible because at that point in time, I wasn't under any treatment or medication. I actually had a hard time getting the words out of my mouth. So imagine running a business that requires you to be 100% visible, to do public speaking, to get in front of the camera, and you have this disease where it makes you feel so self-conscious about speaking. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you all is because every single one of you listening to me right now has some kind of limitation that makes it difficult or nerve wracking for you to do presentations, to communicate in interviews. Maybe you get self conscious about your accent. Maybe you tend to ramble. Maybe you just freeze whenever you are speaking in front of someone. And it often happens when we are talking about ourselves or selling ourselves. So if I, with vestibular migraines, can do this, I know that you can. And in the workshop that I'm hosting in Toronto, I am going to be teaching people what I call magic tricks that have personally helped me feel comfortable communicating, whether it is, on camera or live. Now, the first thing that I wanted to share is a storytelling structure for people who tend to ramble a lot. I call it the 2-sentence story structure. Now, some of you may have heard a lot of storytelling frameworks, whether it's the hero journey with, 12 different steps, or the SOAR framework or the STAR framework. The thing is, when you are on the spot and you have to come up with a story on your feet. All right, my dog is like trying to chime in. Okay, here, you want to chime in? You want to be on the live too? So, yeah, you don't have time to use a framework like the hero journey formula when you're in a meeting. So the 2-sentence story structure is a very great structure to use when you are in a pinch. And actually what I've done here is I have created flashcards for my workshop. Friends, these flashcards took me forever to create. There are 15 attendees in my workshop on Tuesday. And I actually spent like 3 hours in the printing shop, and I had to basically cut out all of these basically cards and stick them on stock paper to make these flashcards because I didn't have time to actually put it in order and just print them directly on stock card. That's how crazy I am about these workshops and making them hands-on. But anyway, 2-sentence story structure. So I'll give you guys an example. By the way, I'm representing today. I used to work for Slalom. And so I am wearing, the blazer today, not because I still work for Slalom, but, fond memories, and it's cold today. And that's all I found in my closet. So in case you are wondering, but yes, let's use an example. So with any story, this is what I want you to think of stories. Stories capture the before and the after. Stories are meant to depict a transformation. So whenever you're stuck and you're like, I don't know how to tell a story, the simple little trick that I'm going to give you is a story needs to show some kind of transformation. So I want you to think of your before state and your after state. If you want to share, let's say, an update in a meeting, share the before, what happened, and the after that you want people to know. Or if you're in an interview and you want to showcase that you're great at something or that you created a win, share the before and the after. So I'll give you guys an example. In 2017, I sat in a Chicago meeting with my boss who wanted us to launch a Salesforce custom solution in 6 weeks when it normally takes 3 months. 6 weeks later, we shipped on time, and the client was able to cut down their wish list from 70% to 30%. This is a complete story. I didn't go into the weeds. Do you see how simple it is? It is literally like a 30-second story. I gave you the before. I was sitting in a Chicago office with my boss who wanted us to launch a product that normally takes 3 months in 6 weeks. And then 6 weeks later, the after, we were able to launch it and cut down the client's wish list from 70% custom solution to 30%. Do you see how simple it is? Now, we could go with this, and this would be a complete story. And that's like one of my magic tricks, is just the before and after. Now, I want you to notice a few things about my story that makes it very engaging and would make it very appropriate for you to share with a recruiter who would realize amazing things about you, like the fact that you were able to convince a client to cut down their wish list, and you have a lot of grit in order to do that. So let me share with you a few things that makes a story interesting and a few techniques that you can use in order to make your stories interesting when you share them. Notice how I use sensory imagery. So when I shared with you guys the before state, I didn't just say, yeah, so my boss wanted us to ship this solution in 3 months instead of 6 weeks. I anchored it to a scene where I was sitting in a meeting room, I was in Chicago, and I was around my development team. This automatically makes your story more believable and helps a recruiter visualize things, okay? The second thing that I did is I anchored it to a time. In 2017, this happened. This is not just for your audience, this is for you as well. It keeps you from rambling because it forces you to pick a moment. And storytelling is all about anchoring a story to a moment. If you are giving a lot of moments, or if you are saying this happened and then this happened and this happened, it's no longer a story, right? Think of movies. When you watch a movie, everything that happens is anchored to a time, a location, and a scene. Okay, the other little trick comes from Pixar. So with Pixar storytelling techniques, there's a concept of the old world and the new world in terms of character development. So in the old world, what was happening, right? What was happening with Cinderella? Rags to riches, right? Old world, she was in rags. New world, she's in riches. You can see the transformation. So these are some of the guidelines that I teach people. And then a few common pitfalls that I want you to think about. So try not to use vague adjectives whenever you're describing something. For example, when you say something like things were tough back then, that doesn't make your story interesting, okay? But if you say something specific, such as in 2019, our checkout was so broken every Friday at 2 a.m., I lost 3 hours of sleep. You see that? You can say things were tough, or you can be specific without saying that it was stuff. And that's what we call show versus tell. Another example, we had a lot of problems. What does that mean? What were the problems? Versus our support inbox had 200 unanswered emails. So you see the difference, being specific, giving evidence, that makes your story a lot more believable and engaging. Okay, now I want to go into the next component of telling a story. So we started with the before and after, right? And the before and after is very important. Why? Because the thing is, you need to pick where point A is and where point B is. Because again, a story is a transformation. You're showing the before and after. Now, why is it important? If anyone is listening here in the chat, why is it important to pick a point A and a point B in your story? Who can tell me if you're listening? Well, the reason we want to pick a point A and point B is to keep us from rambling. If we know the start of our story and the end of our story, that forces us to come up with a middle that is contained and supports the beginning and the end. So this is why when I tell stories, sometimes I don't say them in order. I don't talk about the beginning and then the middle and then the end. I give away the beginning and the end, and then I tell you how it happened. Because if we go back to my 2-sentence story, I gave you the before and the after. I told you that I was sitting with my boss in the Chicago office, and he wanted us to basically build a 70% custom solution in literally just 6 weeks. And 6 weeks later, we managed to actually launch it. And you're curious, well, how did you do that? How did you do that? This structure where you give the before and end, the cool thing about it is it actually creates suspense. And it actually gives the recruiter the answer, what you achieved. And so then they end up leaning in and listening to figure out how you did it. Now, if we go into the next step of telling the story, the how, right? How did you do it? How are you able to achieve this transformation? The mistake that people make is they get into the how too soon. But when you talk about the how too soon without anchoring it to an obstacle, which I call your villain, then it makes what you have done look too easy. You don't want people to take what you've done for granted. And especially if you're talking to someone like a recruiter who has no context about what you've done, to them, it's like, yeah, you just did these things. But when you present the villain, when you present the obstacle, when you show them the adversity, now what happens is they realize that you're really great at what you've done. So let's talk about the obstacle when you tell your story. There are different types of obstacles, also known as villains. So here's an example of a villain. In all of our careers, there's always tight timelines, right? So that's an example of an obstacle that you may be facing that made it difficult for you to execute on your initiatives. So tight timeline, no room to breathe. In this case, that could be a villain for me in my story of how we had to launch this product in 6 weeks. Another example is politics, silos, lack of alignment. When you have leaders who are not getting along or who have different perspectives, right? And you have to align them. Another example of a villain could be, we've always done it that way. Who has heard that? Systems, legacy systems, broken tools. Could be self, maybe fear, doubt, lost direction, right? Low morale with the team. So those are examples of obstacles. Now, the other mistake that people make is when they tell their story, they throw every obstacle under the sun. Now, in real life, that could be the case. You've ran into all of these obstacles that got in the way when you were trying to go from point A to point B. But you don't want to list every single obstacle, because then your story is going to be long-winded. And so what you want to do is what I call the rule of one. Only pick one villain when you're telling a bite-sized story. And the villain or the obstacle is going to determine the path that you're going to take when you tell the story. So I want you to imagine, if any of you are Super Mario fans, you know, when you're playing Super Mario, there are these like green pipes, and depending on what green pipe you pick, you go into a different world, right? On the way to saving the princess. So it's the same thing when you're telling a story. Depending on the obstacle you choose, you might take a different path. And this is why it's important to figure out which obstacle you want to talk about, because that is going to determine where the story is going to go. So in my case, what I decided to pick for the villain is lack of alignment. What made it very challenging for us to launch the product in 6 weeks is the fact that this particular client that we're working with had 30 account managers, and each one of them had a different workflow for the product. And there was no way that we could align 30 account managers in 6 weeks. So that is my villain. So guess what the rest of the story is going to be? The rest of the story is going to be about how I got those stakeholders aligned. Now, if I picked a different villain, like their tech systems being broken, then guess what? The story is going to be how I had to overcome that legacy system. What did I do, to improve it, right? So that's my little tidbit about making your story concise, is pick one villain and be very conscious about ensuring that the rest of the story supports how you overcame that obstacle or villain. Okay, so the last part of the story. Now, if you were following the SOAR framework, which I'm starting to find is not the best framework in order to tell a good story that's engaging, but if you are using it, you're thinking in your head, situation, obstacle, action, result. We talked about the obstacle. You're probably going to start talking about the action. But when people talk about the action, they sound like instructional manuals. And they start speaking like this. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And guess what happens to the recruiter? She falls asleep listening to you. So what I like to teach instead of action is what I call conversation. The thing is, when you're in the workplace, everything you do usually starts with a conversation. So in my story of basically dealing with launching a product that is highly custom in 6 weeks instead of 3 months, and dealing with a situation where we had 30 stakeholders who all had a different idea of what their process looks like, I had a conversation. It all started with a conversation. So I was actually coming out of a discovery session with one of the account manager. My head was spinning. And I turned to the UX designer and I said, this is literally our 4th meeting. And every single meeting we've had, each account manager had a different idea of what the workflow looks like. There's no way that we're going to be able to align people. So here's what I think we should do. Here's my out-of-the-box idea. I think we should get the development team to just go ahead and build the whole thing. Just build the out-of-the-box standard solution. Let's see how fast they build it. Lo and behold, first of all, the UX designer high-fived me with this idea. And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, I walk into the VP's office and I say, you know what? Our team just finished building our out of the box solution. Here's what it looks like. They saw the entire flow and they were shocked by how fast we built the whole thing, that they said to me, you know what? This is crazy. It's crazy that we're literally on our 7th iteration of the requirements document, and that you guys were able to build the whole solution faster than us aligning on a requirements document. The heck with this. We're only going to customize 30% of the solution instead of 70%. So here's the point of the story. Sometimes you have to give stakeholders something to react to in order to align them. Do you see how I told the story now? Incredible, isn't it? I wasn't long-winded. It was pretty fast. There's a lesson behind it. I made sure that every single part of the story is actually aligned to point A and point B. So that's my little magic trick. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are in Toronto, we kind of closed registrations, but if you twist my arm, because I already printed everything and I cut out everything and we planned the food, we actually have 2 spots that I could give away. You know, don't tell my co-facilitator, she might kill me. But if you really, really find value in this, and this is something that you really want to learn, it's very different doing this live because I taught you basically the technique, but it's another thing to actually implement it and get feedback on it. You can send me a DM. Give me a reason why you want to be in this workshop. Because again, I'd have to only pick 2 people. There's no way I can pick more than 2 because we already put in our orders and we kind of have we put in like a 2-person buffer just in case we get last minute people raising their hands. So if you want to be part of this, then, send me a DM and I'll see what I can do. The event is on Tuesday, May 12th, and it starts at 5:30 p.m. 5:30 to 6 is the networking portion, but 6 o'clock is when the workshop starts, sharp. Now, if you're not in Toronto and you really loved this, you enjoyed this, and you kind of wish that you could be part of a workshop where you can practice your storytelling because you find that you ramble in meetings, or you find that when it comes to interviews and networking conversations, you feel stuck, then I do host a version of this virtually in my program, and I have clients all over the world. I have clients who are the director level. I have senior individual contributors who have more than 15 years of experience, and I have VPs. And if you find that, you could use a support system, then all you need to do is also DM me, because I do teach this in my program. So if you want to chat, I'm going to show you how to book time with me. Let me show you. If you go on my LinkedIn profile, right underneath my heading, there is a book an appointment button. And what that's going to do is going to take you to a page where you can book a call with me. It is a 15-minute career diagnosis. You can click on this button and fill out a 2-minute intake so that I can understand your situation and what's blocking you, and we can come up with a plan during our call. All right. I hope you enjoyed this, especially the storytelling part. If you enjoyed this, I'd love to hear from you. It's always beneficial for me to hear your thoughts in the comments and what, type of content, benefits you. And if you're very, very, very shy and you don't want to say anything in the comments, then a like would be awesome, because that's a form of feedback as well. And hey, wouldn't anyone want to know when they're presenting something if someone actually benefited, watched this, learned something? Okay. Happy Sunday to you all. I just thought I'd pop in and I would share this. Also, I really love this drink. I'm so obsessed. It is called Sparkling Ice, and it's kiwi strawberry. Oh my goodness, it is so freaking good. You know, it does taste like strawberry and kiwi, which is a very difficult flavor to mimic. Has anyone heard of this drink? Do you guys know about it? Let me know. Okay. Hope you all have a good night.